All right, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, wherever you are in our wide world, and welcome to another NetHope webinar. My name is Seth Otto, and I'm the Digital Communications Manager here at NetHope and producer of the NetHope webinar series. Today, our expert panel will share findings from our 2024 State of Humanitarian and Development Cybersecurity Report. We'll reveal strategies and approaches for bridging the gaps that leave nonprofits and civil society at risk of attack, and we will present key findings from the report, what they mean for the sector, and our recommendations for the path forward to catalyze collective action for organizations and investment from donors. First, let's go over a bit of housekeeping. Before we get started, let's make this webinar interactive. Let us know what comes up for you. Please post your comments and questions in the chat window. The presenters will address them during our discussion period. In the hours following today's webinar, please pay attention to your email. We'll be sending you a follow-up that includes links to the webinar recording, the slides, and any other resources that we share during today's presentation and discussion. And we value your feedback. Your opinion matters to us, and we use your responses to our survey to improve this webinar series for you and our broader NetHope community. It also provides our presenters with an opportunity to connect with you if you want them to. All right, with all that out of our way, I would like to welcome our expert speakers. Nino Harris, NetHope's Virtual Chief Information Security Officer. Daniela Weber, our Deputy Director of NetHope's Center for the Digital Nonprofit. Diana Langley, NetHope's Chief Operating Officer. And we'll now hand things over to Daniela to get us started. Take it away, Daniela.
Thank you so much, Seth. So I will now have the challenge of finding my presentation and sharing it while talking to you. So today is the big day. We are launching the 2024 State of Humanitarian and Development Cybersecurity. The report is up on our website. There is a code here you can scan. We're going to show that again later, or we will also pop the link into the chat window. But before we go to what's in the report, we're going to set the scene a little bit and talk to you about NetHope's cybersecurity program. Nino, take it away, please.
Great, thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good day to all of you guys, wherever you are. I saw the chat, how it sort of indicated everything is global and cybersecurity is no different from that. We have recognized that in NetHope that if you want to be successful in protecting data and protecting the privacy, confidentiality, and integrity of data, we have to collectively work. We have to share. We have to basically help each other whenever is necessary. And I think we all know and agree that it is necessary in most of the moves that we make, whether it is selecting a correct data location that will represent our data, where we collect it, how we collect it, how we defend, etc., etc. And cybersecurity is increasing. The threat is increasing. There is no denying, and it's not going to go down. So if you thought in a couple of years everything will become rosy, I'm afraid it is far from that. The reality is that international NGOs are targeted. And the reason is because we have over 1.6 billion users' data throughout the whole entire collective work that we do, certain part of the world, from Africa all the way to North America, Europe, etc., etc. So it shows that there is a need for an organization to come and say, well, we're going to create a bridge between all these organizations and individuals and developers and members and so on and so forth, with appropriate information that will help us to be more secure, because at the end it's all about how do we protect our environment, our ecosystem, against the tiniest of bridge. I know when I say the word tiniest of bridge, you might think just one single device has been compromised, but in reality, one single device could have access to our entirety of ecosystem of our data, which is mean your whole entire data is compromised. So how does NetHope actually does that? Well, it is a multi-sector involvement. It isn't just developers. It isn't just implementers. It isn't just one A to B. It has to be all the way from range of A to Z that will come and collect all these bodies in one place collaboratively with a strategic approach in mind that addresses the issues that are related to cyber threat, and not always just the technology side of it, from social engineering, from physical security, we have to really bear in mind that this whole monster of cyber world, the cybersecurity, the threat of it is so vast at the moment. The vector of somebody could come and compromise is so vast that it requires attention. It requires paying attention to all those elements that are involved. This is where we emphasize on insight. This is where we emphasize on the skills and the sharing required to be able to say, well, actually, I saw something happen. Let's just go to NetHope to see what the story is, or let's go to the members that maybe they have seen something very similar to that, so that will help the others. It is all about cooperation in a level that we have never seen before, because now hopefully we all recognize and understand in international organizations and international NGO organization level that it requires attention. And if we don't pay really the attention that it requires, sooner or later, one of us will be compromised. Sooner or later, your data is somewhere that it is exchanged between bad guys, and they don't really care if we do good or not. They don't care if you are working somewhere in South Sudan or you are far away in Far East Asia and helping people. For them, at the end, is all about controlling your ecosystem to be able to say, I have actually managed to control these devices. Now let's just introduce a ransomware to them, and hopefully they have to pay because they have never thought about the backups. So those are some of the stuff that we are trying to bring this under this umbrella of digital protection, and it is going to be long term. I've mentioned that it's not going to go down, it's not going to evaporate in a couple of months, years, that you will say, oh, cybersecurity is no longer a norm, is no longer a threat that we need to pay attention, but it is going to be with us. And sooner we pay attention, cheaper it will become. Next, please. It might sound scary, but it is. And I'm not trying to create this fear-mongering factor, but it just, if we don't pay attention and we just say, no, everything is safe, everything is rosy because we haven't been compromised, is not a way forward. Better we are protected, better we are ready. It will be much easier to tackle the whole threat of cyber and what comes with it. And then it's all about damage, and it's all about somebody will lose somewhere. And this is what we're trying to avoid. Now, with 4 pillars of digital protection, this is where we try to basically create, deliver, and nourish what I just described through building capacities. We provide different type of training through our partners, tools and partnership that we could basically introduce, enabling mechanism that will help all NGOs and international NGOs, partners, implementers to share knowledge through a global humanitarian ISAC, that you would come and say, well, I don't know what information or where can I find some information that it is fitting to what actually I'm seeing? Because an anomaly comes, and if you would say, I'm just going to go and search through internet, most likely you're going to end up in a black hole of data from one node to the next one without a solution. But at the end, this whole idea of an ISAC, a global humanitarian ISAC, is to provide solution, to come up and say, we have managed to identify a gap, we have managed to identify vulnerabilities, issues, and most likely one of the partners that have shared how to mitigate or how to tackle this so it will not happen in future. And obviously with virtual CISO services that we provide in NetHope, hopefully community, you guys will all have my email by now. If not, I will definitely share with you guys. If there are any need for help, you know where to send an email, who to knock his virtual door, and hopefully, and normally I'm very quick in respond, doesn't matter when, doesn't matter what time of day. So hopefully we will have all these facilities in our hand to make sure that we are at the end all protected. Remember the CIA triad? It is all about that. And this is what we are trying to achieve by building those bridges across different platforms, different members, different providers that will be there to help us all to achieve a better security for all our members. Daniela, back to you.
Thank you, Nino. That inbox is going to be very full. So this is the 3rd year we've surveyed our members, and 32 of them have responded to the survey this year. Why are we doing this? So one is to inform our members and also the wider sector's decision-making around best practices in cybersecurity. Of course, it also informs our own digital protection program. So it tells us where there are capacity gaps to fill, where system change is needed, and that's where we are going to focus on. And last not least, Nino talked already about the Global Humanitarian ISAC that serves then as a catalyst with this input for those cybersecurity needs that our members have and that the wider sector has. Here are the key findings from the report, and then we're going to go a bit more into the details. So clearly the risk is on the rise. So 4 out of 5 respondents noted that they have a static or an increased risk level for their organization. Cyber incidents and data breaches are absolutely the norm. Almost 2/3 of our respondents have experienced a breach in the last year. On the flip side, cybersecurity is still not a well-managed risk, so the confidence of our members in their current state and their current ability to manage cybersecurity is not as high as we would like it to be. And part of that is also that the specialized expertise, the cybersecurity expertise, is not common to have as a capability and capacity in organizations. So very few have a lead role with specialized expertise. And this is the first key finding here, the first key number. Only 10% of nonprofits actually report having a CISO in their organization. Nino, talk to us a little bit more about that.
Great. So, I mean, we have to really understand is not just the lack of CISO here that organization need to pay attention to. I mean, you have to ask yourself, when it comes to cybersecurity and threats, who do you have to go to within your organization? Is it still the old poor IT team blamed for everything? Or do we really have a department of InfoSec? Do we have an department which is in charge of blue teaming, red teaming, purple teaming? Basically, if I explain, a red team is how a malicious hacker will try to hack you. A blue team is how would your defend mechanism, your team that is there, make sure to defend and come up with measures that are correctly providing protection for your ecosystem. And thirdly, the purple one, that they could basically play the role of being in red team and in blue team. Do we have all of that? Or in reality, it is still the IT? And fortunately, I mean, throughout my experience over 25 years, I think, in the world of cyber, I still see that when you go to an organization and you would say, okay, who is in charge of cybersecurity? Often it is pinpointed that IT team, but in reality, it is different tasks, different responsibilities that we have. This is where I want you guys to sort of think about the reality of requiring, and why should you require a team? I know when the word team comes in, you might think that 5 individuals, 10 individuals, as long as budget allows, as long as there's a department that is in charge of cybersecurity. So when you come and say, system are under attack or data is compromised, the system is compromised, you will go back and you will say, we have sufficient human expertise and capital that will help us to recover back. Because at the end, I mean, as much as we try to stop compromise and attack, we are often behind. And the reason we are often behind because the bad guys have enough time, we don't. Today, you guys are here. Tomorrow is another task, another project. We constantly work with delivery and so on and so forth. But for bad guys, for bad actors, no, they want to compromise the system and control that system. So it's just a matter of time how soon they will get in. And we try to make sure that the time required for that is going to be extended so they cannot easily compromise the system. And this is where it becomes very vital. You would say, who's going to lead the responsibility of cybersecurity? Who will come up with policy all the way from the board of directors when they agree with a policy that will be implemented across the whole organization? It is quite vital. And I know often budget doesn't allow. I know in certain part of this planet, you would see that expertise is not there, but hopefully with programs that we are running, such as providing different training, SANS is one of our partners which provides different element of cybersecurity training. Is not always technical. Remember, please, only 70% of hacking is technical. 30% of that is non-technical, which is mean if I know how to use social engineering properly, well, most likely I will be in. I don't have to be a code breaker, the one that often Hollywood portrayed us, but in reality is that you have to bear in mind there are many vectors of cybersecurity. So think about that why do requirements? How do we go and plug this gap and make sure that the mitigations are there through different training, through different forums, the webinars, I am here as a virtual CISO, that in case that if you guys require anything and you are not sure, and some of the members have already done that, they get in touch. They have a variety of questions that hopefully will be able to tackle some of those gaps. I mean, it's not going to be 100%, but it is a start that hopefully will provide us a better protection. Daniela?
Thank you, Nino. And just speaking as an ex-CIO myself, I see almost a quarter of CIOs is in charge of the cybersecurity program in their organizations. I'm finding that very scary because I know I would not have had the in-depth knowledge to do that, and I was relying very heavily on my CISO in my organization to provide that. So that is absolutely, absolutely important. But to our next topic, so that's about the confidence of cybersecurity being a well-managed risk in the organization. Nino, talk to us about that.
I think it is very crucial that you understand, first of all, there is a risk. And if you don't recognize a risk, it is going to be almost impossible to find out what are the threats associated with that risk that comes to your environment. And this is where it starts from a proper inventory. And there's actually one slide that talks about some of the element of inventory, from accounts, from assets, from third parties that we are managing, etc., etc. And the level of cybersecurity, the risk associated with it, it is going to increase. There is inevitability to it. And the reason that it is going to be inevitable, because it is so easy to become hackers nowadays with tutorials, with tools. To be honest, amount of tools that I personally have, because I used to work as pen tester a long time ago, I think there are more than 10 million scripts and tools that I would personally use. And you don't have to really understand in real world, you don't have to really understand what they do. You pick a target, you will say, okay, I'm going to go and attack, and that's it. If you are lucky, well, you get in. If not, you will find other tools that will do the same stuff. So you wouldn't be surprised, and you shouldn't be surprised that you will see the risk is going high when it comes to cyber. And there is that reason, because everybody has access now to tools and tutorials to become the hacker that they wanted. So the level of risk, as you can see in comparison to last year and this year, how that has sort of changed. And it just indicates that sooner or later, if your organization hasn't felt about the increase in risk related to your cyber world, your ecosystem, in most cases that you haven't really paid that much attention on the granularity level to understand it. And how do we do? Well, there are plenty of forums, and hopefully with our ISAC soon to run, we will have more info about that when an organization will come and find out to see what the trend is, what the threats are, what new method of attack is used. It will give us a better picture, and we will be all better ready and more so the feeling that we are more safe and secure, or at least we would say that there's a community that can all collectively work together to make sure that we are resilient against cyber threats. Daniela?
Yes, so the next one is, of course, the high level of attacks. So over 65% of respondents have experienced a breach or a critical data incident in the last year. Talk to us a bit, Nino, about the different types of cyber attacks that you've seen.
I think this is very important, because different environment will face different type of attack when it comes to cyber. You would see, for example, in the world of NGOs, often it is the phishing and social engineering element. It's just because of nature of what we do, it demands that. If you go for banking, you would see a lot of sophisticated type of attack. If you would go for NGOs, often you would see ransomware attacks, especially, in health, for example, it is often ransomware, because data is all encrypted now. To be able to access patient records, you have to go and pay for it. Otherwise, there is no other way around it. Financial sector, military, government, developers, etc., they all face different type of cyber attack out there. It doesn't mean you have to ignore the next one that you haven't seen in your ecosystem. It just, you have to pay attention to the whole entire vector of attack, which is so broad nowadays that could come from anywhere. A wireless access point that is not safe. Just because you thought, oh, our office is in middle of nowhere, that doesn't mean you are protected. Believe it or not, I have an antenna. The range is about 35 miles. the house that I rented, I mean, the people complained because it was like a cannon sticking out of the balcony. So they said you have to remove that, because I used to provide training for wireless pen testing a long time ago, and it was just to demo that distance nowadays doesn't mean anything. I could pay an agent and physically to come and compromise your system, and in most cases the APTs, advanced persistent threats, which often sophisticated type of hack is done, you would see there is an element of agent involved that physically comes and pays you a visit. So pay attention to different variety of and different type of cyber attack, because one of those, well, if you want my honest opinion here, I will use the one that works. I know, as scary as it sounds, but I will use an attack type that will work. So hopefully that will be a clear message that we need to pay attention to all type of attacks that are out there. Daniela.
Governance, that's a big point as well. So we see that only 59% of nonprofits report to their board regularly and through a practiced and reliable process. So let's have a bit of a look what that looks like in detail.
And again, if we go back to the few previous slides when I talked about the lack of human expertise resources there, that we'll often see when there is an issue or there's a cyber threat or there is a cyber attack, we immediately go back and say, IT help us, because, well, they are the key holders. And often we think that they will be able to provide the mitigations and solutions to the problem of cyber, but it is not. And the way that you guys hopefully can see and compare between 2024 and 2023, how sort of it has portrayed itself as it is a less high profile cybersecurity. Maybe I would say no, although AI is the buzzword, but we have noticed majority of partners, majority of members are still investing in cybersecurity. Although AI is a shiny thing to have, but if it is not there, still we need to invest in cybersecurity. I have been in those situations. I've mentioned that, you know, in different capacities when I used in my past previous lives, they asked me to create stuff that was purely related to IT. And when I would go and say, to be honest, I don't know how this is done, they will look at you and say, but you are IT, you should know all of the IT. But in reality, it's the same for cybersecurity. Just because they are in charge of your environment, your domains, your access, your website, etc., that doesn't mean they will be good in cybersecurity. And same for coders. You know, I'm not a coder. I can code. I hate coding, so please don't force me to code. But if you force me to code, I will. But my job or my passion is I would like to see if there is a vulnerability within the code so I can break it. So I hope that the message should be clear here. But based on what we have discovered, unfortunately, this is the state of affair at the moment with members and organizations. Daniela.
Thank you, Nino. And again, speaking as a former CAO, it is an opportunity to be able to go to your board on a regular basis and give an update, even if there's no incident, but give an update on what measures you're taking and also where there are gaps, because that also then helps with the conversation about funding, which we're going to come to later.
Indeed.
Which we're going to come to now, in fact. Yes, so budget. Indeed. Organizations struggle to quantify the return on investment for their cybersecurity efforts to formulate why budget is needed.
Well, this is often a fallacy, if I could use the word fallacy here, that we would think that cybersecurity, I have bought a firewall for 80,000 and is not doing anything. It is sitting there and I have no idea what it's supposed to do. Cybersecurity, or the measures that we apply, and I want to sort of explain and distinguish between cybersecurity and data privacy. Cybersecurities are measures that we will apply in place to make sure data is private. So I hope that will make sense. A firewall is a cybersecurity measure. A firewall is there, for example, only to allow certain access from point A to point B, nothing else. Now that wouldn't really come back and say after a year you have managed to now gain $200,000 because, well, I'm a firewall, I'm doing this stuff. It doesn't work that way. It is, always think about cybersecurity measures as enabling measures for your organization to make sure that whatever it is operating, it is in a safe environment with privacy, confidentiality, and integrity at the heart of this machine, this ecosystem. And if you don't, and if your organization constantly thinks about, well, but it's not doing anything, it's not generating any money, it is going to avoid catastrophe for you. If in a long term, in a short term, heaven forbid, if your system goes down, if your data is compromised, your systems are no longer under your control, to make sure that you have access to those, again, this is where it's going to cost you a lot of money and time and resources. And this is where it becomes really an issue when we think about budget. What budget should I have for my cybersecurity? Should it be part of the IT? Should it be part of the admin stuff? And so on and so forth? Not really. If it was my ideal world, cybersecurity has its own body inside the organization, will have its own team that is involved, and will have its own budget that it is appropriate to the business. We also have to understand, in some cases, a measure is way too high, and you would say, I'm going to accept the responsibility here. Let me give you an example. For example, you have a website, maybe with traffic of bare minimum of few thousand individuals a month, is not generating anything, it is static, there are no accounts, etc., etc. And somebody comes and says, oh, actually, it's going to cost you $500,000 to protect that. You would just say, to be honest, I'm going to accept the risk here, because spending that much doesn't really make any sense. But you would see that majority of members here, they are really struggling to see how that budget is adequate, is that inadequate, is that enough? Is that more than what we should spend, and so on and so forth? And should we tie that to a certain department or not? As you can see, majority are still tying that to poor IT department to say, IT, you go and sort out the whole cybersecurity. But in reality, it shouldn't be like that. Daniela.
Thank you. We're going to talk about frameworks, and we're seeing here that there are multiple frameworks in use, and also 60% of the respondents use more than one framework. What are the frameworks good for, and why do members use more than one?
You have to think, when the word framework comes in, you have to think about a guideline. It wouldn't be the silver bullet of fixing what the issues are. It wouldn't really recommend what the mitigations are, because in general, a framework doesn't really know what you have inside your ecosystem. This is where, based on different type of frameworks, such as Open Web Application Security, NIST, ICS, PCI DSS, HIPAA, etc., they will come up and say, for example, if you are working with credit cards, to make sure that your environment is safe and secure, you need to go through those steps of security assessment. A framework will basically guide you through a security assessment. And it will say, okay, you are collecting credit card data. What exactly do you have to do? Oh, you have to use encryption. Are you using encryption? Yes, we are. Tick box. If you are not, what would be the impact of that? Well, data is no longer encrypted. Man in the middle could happen. Everybody could just read the data. Integrity and confidentiality of data is not there. Your mitigation is, well, we're going to apply encryption, end of story, and so on and so forth. Now, which one should you use? And this is where I think advocacy of our NetHope is, as a community, since we are mostly doing the same NGO stuff across different parts of the world, is to come up and unify our approach with selection of one of the frameworks that will cover a lot of element of cybersecurity related stuff, and security assessment that will help us. This is where ICS will be one of the one that will recommend, and in most cases, our members and our organization that are partnered with us will also apply that. But that doesn't mean it is the end of the world, and you would say, oh, actually, I'm very into ISO standard 27000, whether it is 20001, and so on and so forth. There is no wrong and right doing stuff with it. It's just a unified element of, if we all go and approach the same framework and use the same framework and adopt when it is required, it will give us a sort of more clearer picture of where things are standing. So if I go and say control 1 of ICS, we would all know, and the answer will be basically yes and no. If it is yes, what should we do extra. If it is no, what is the impact? What is the gap? And so on and so forth. Now, that doesn't stop you applying different and variety of frameworks, as mentioned through our finding within the survey we conducted. And some members, they have used few of those frameworks because they will cover different elements. As I mentioned, if I don't collect credit cards, I wouldn't go and touch PCI DSS. But if I had to, well, it is a regulation. So it's no longer a framework, but it becomes a regulation. And on regulation, we have to follow them. It's not that a wish list any longer, because normally with frameworks, it is a wish list, is a guideline. But when it, for example, you go and you say, I want to become ISO certified, then, well, you are ISO certified, everything becomes regulation rather than just a pure guideline here. I hope that makes sense, and I hope it will sort of widen your approach and view to different cybersecurity frameworks, and to select the one that it fits to your ecosystem. Daniela?
Thank you, Nino. We're now going to spend a little bit of time on those tools that help us with cybersecurity and to what extent they are being used. Device management first, Nino.
Great. I mean, look at an F-25. I think it's the latest version, right? It is, I know it is an airplane, fighter jet. If I give you that, what would you do with it? That is the same dilemma we are facing in the world of cybersecurity. In most cases, there are no adequate tools that will help us with unified endpoint management, UEM, or endpoint detection and respond. That is the first. So only, for example, 70% of members are using those tools that will protect on the go, because those are the live system, will check anomalies, and based on anomaly will detect and stop. Remember, an antivirus, an AV, will often pick a virus that is already being captured by a laboratory, a lab, for example, McAfee, Kaspersky, Microsoft Defender, etc., etc. But if this is not detected and the signature of that file is brand new, an antivirus will just look at it and say, well, I have no idea what it is, so I can't do anything. But with EDR and UEM, this is where it becomes a live protector. And it says, well, this thing is trying to connect your machine to an external entity, and I'm not going to be happy with it. I'm going to block it. Now, having those F-25s, as good and as shiny as it is absolutely fine. But this is where we go back to the human resources side of it. You also need to have teams that will understand how to manage these tools and devices. Having a firewall is really good, but you also need individuals who will be able to monitor, check the logs, and mechanism that is basically bypasses. There is a way that I can bypass my own firewall. Those are all crucial elements when we talk about tools and solutions that are out there. Just don't think about the shiny element of this tool. Always think about, what else should I need with this tool? Is that the expertise? Is that time? Is that going to be in-house controlled? Is that the third party that comes and offer all of that? So it will be a variety of ways that we will basically pay attention to this stuff. But as data shows it, only 70% of members basically have those tools, which is mean I can now hack 30% of them. Just as a sake of argument, that you would see if and there are auto scanners at the moment. As soon as an entity is connected, will scan the network, and if it discovers there is no protection, it will just hop into it and it will try to compromise those systems. Next, please. Now, there is a good sign about this multi-factor authentication, that it is increasing. If we compare them between last year and this year, 61% of responders are saying that they are using the multi-factor authentication. I want you guys to always remember, doesn't matter how good the systems are, doesn't matter how many millions and billions we have spent, at the end, the humans are the ones still in charge. We are the key holders. We are the authenticators that are authenticating into these systems. And if those mechanism of authentications are not properly done with multi-factor authentication, this is where it really becomes an issue. And it doesn't matter how many characters of password I have, how complex it is. If it is just a one-factor authentication that I will know it is a username and password, it is just a matter of time that until somebody comes and breaks. But when it is multi-factors, somebody has to go and crack and break the multi-factor elements. But it is a good sign, 61%. It is not perfect. Hopefully that is one of the gaps that are out there. By pushing this message that it provides better protection, it provides more control over accounts that we want to monitor, multi-factor authentication is a must. Next, please. Asset and account management. Now, a significant increase in managing accounts, which is vital. If you don't know who has access to what, basically you are blind at the moment. And for example, in NetHope, if I don't know who is admin of what, who is in charge of what, who is managing, etc., will become an issue. Because later on, if I wanted to do an assessment, an audit of my system, and somebody says, well, who is in charge of your Zoom? I would just say, I have no idea. How bad that sounds. And if you don't know, as the cybersecurity unit, most likely the rest of the organization have no clue. Somebody somewhere has access to it, but we don't really know who they are. But what we are lagging here is the management of an asset. Although accounts are still assets, but an asset such as a phone, a computer, a laptop, bring your own devices nowadays. They are really, although everybody has their own computer and their own smartphones that are capable of doing a lot of computational calculation and very powerful machines, but how do I have a track record of an auditor, what is going on, how many laptops, etc., that are coming inside the system and connecting to the network, which is going to be very vital. Next, please. Yeah. Capabilities for tools use. I've already talked about that. Although there is an increase, a significant increase of 29% of responder reporting, sort of a lack of clarity about whether they have sufficient humans. Let me just give you the honest answer. There is insufficient human expertise in the world of cybersecurity, especially on the gender equality of it, females to males. When you look at it, unfortunately, it is predominantly a male field. I have no idea why, to be honest. I mean, there are many reasons. If we go to that, it will become for hours and hours talking about this whole entire issue. But it indicates that we require training. It indicates we require sharing information, knowledge, tools that are out there that will help the community to be more in control and not to be afraid of the word cyber. It doesn't have to be technical. There are many of my friends, colleagues that I know, they are not really technical, but they know how to manage cybersecurity just because they understand where a vector of an attack is, and they will come and basically do something there. And tools that are out there from SIM, which is a security incident and event management tool, from an antivirus, from cloud environment, etc., make sure that there are proper trainings conducted for short-term and long-term. Invest in that because it becomes one of those assets that will protect your organization. Next, please.
And I think that's a very important point, Nino, because very often the fallacy is that people think about resources needed for implementation, but implementation of these tools is just the very first step, right? It's then the ongoing monitoring, detecting, and acting that is the really important bit. So those resources need to be there, and that capability needs to be there for good.
Indeed.
Now, after all this, there is also another dimension to this, really. Localization, it can mean that we have common infrastructure, or at least sharing data with local organizations, with implementation partners. So the thinking about cybersecurity doesn't necessarily end at the borders of our own organizations. We have to make sure we're looking at a whole ecosystem of delivering our services and how that is protected. So those tools and capabilities we talked about are not only needed within our organizations, but they are needed for the whole supply chain. And it's not going away, as Nino said, it's becoming more and more. So that is also a dimension we absolutely need to focus on. So with that, Nino, recommendations?
Where can I start? I mean, there are plenty out there. but some of the one that based on what the report has indicated, recognizing the risk. I mentioned that if you don't register a risk, you are going to be blind against whatever comes from outside. Making cybersecurity priority and allocate resources for it. Choosing the right framework is going to be vital. Just because a framework is there, just because it is free and it is vast, it doesn't mean it will provide appropriate need for your organization. Basic hygienes in cybersecurity is so vital. Believe it or not, over 80% of hack that we see out there is basic hygienes that is not followed, with username admin and password of admin123. It is common practice even with big players. Establishing an inventory of devices and application accounts, preparing for a cyber response. Just don't ignore that. And if you have a plan to respond, make sure you test that. Make sure if you have a backup plan, you test that to see if it is going to work on a rainy day. Not just because we have a plan, that doesn't mean you are okay, you are safe. It just, if you haven't tested it, you are still blind. Nurturing the specialized expertise. Protect it. Don't let me walk away from your organization. Provide me more training, provide me the assurance that I am in the right place to apply the trade and the expertise that I have, building a capacity for everyone. Remember, one department is in charge of cybersecurity, the rest are responsible to apply the measures that are coming from cybersecurity team. Influencing the global system, the global NGO world, that just because we are doing good stuff, that doesn't mean we are immune. That doesn't mean we are safe from the cyber threat. To be honest, we are one of the easiest targets out there, because often the emphasis is on delivery of a project rather than how secure we deliver those projects. Hopefully this is changing. Hopefully the passion and the power being those who are decision makers will understand that it has to be an emphasis. It has to be a collaborative approach to cybersecurity to be able to provide better protection for all of us. So I hope I'm optimistic about future, and I think we can achieve a very secure and robust systems if we work together as a team.
And on that positive note, tell us what NetHope is doing about all this, Nino.
So working groups, over 300 staff working on a humanitarian developing and a conversation about cybersecurity. This is where we gather and we talk and we share different information, different stuff from technical to non-technical. Everything is involved. Virtual CISO programming, SAN training that are there, grant that will, and soon we have one that will be released. So those of you guys who are interested in doing something in the world of cybersecurity, that will be a good opportunity. But remember, a grant has to tell all of us a story. It's not just it covers my security, but how did you achieve that? How do you got to that point? Donor advocacies. This is where our voice in NetHope is going to be very crucial for all of us to come and say, those are the gaps that we have discovered. This is where the tools are required. This is where everybody collectively would come up and say, that's how we can help the organizations that involve the international NGOs to be able to stay on their feet on a secure and protective way. Structuring a threat briefing information member detection and response program. I think this will be vital. We have done that in NetHope, in Ukraine, in South Sudan, in Turkey, in Syria. This is where during the earthquake, even recently on the blackout of communication in Bangladesh, we were there to advise and tell members that are on the ground, be careful. Doesn't just because an event happened, just because a blackout happened, it doesn't mean that the cyber criminals are sleeping or taking break. For them, there is another opportunity. In Turkey and in Syria during the earthquake, we saw a lot of social engineering, a lot of spamming and scamming, pretending to be donors, pretending to be collecting donations, and at the end, they were just a bunch of hackers trying to steal every penny out there. Over.
Thank you, Nino. And this concludes our presentation. So we have a couple more resources for you to look at. Those will be also in the slide deck that we will send out after the webinar. So we have more on the Global Humanitarian ISAC. We have a very interesting blog post about the importance of keeping civil society protected because it is critical infrastructure. And Nino mentioned the working group. If you are a NetHope member, you can join the working group and be part of all those conversations that are happening there. And also another place where conversations will happen about this is the NetHope Global Summit. The registration is open. So also for your consideration, if you haven't registered yet, please go and do so. And with that, I will also ask Diana to be with us. I see we have a number of questions already in the chat. So we're going to have a look at those. And I'm going to scroll up here. So we have one question here from Antonia. Any pointers for data protection professionals? How can we effectively support the IT technical experts in strengthening our risk management and incident response?
If I could answer that question, you have to have strong policies, Antonio. Before you think about how an IT technician expert will look at environment to protect those. This is where a policy, when it is clear on the board that comes all the way to implementation of the implementing of how do we do proper measures of security will be vital. Every device, every IT work that comes, or every IT technician that will look at a device or a technology will have a different approach to it. There are basics that we also could follow. Most platforms, for example, as just for the sake of argument, let's say Microsoft comes and says you are going to install an operating system. It will indicate what are the basic requirements to stay at least on the safe side of it. You don't open ports, for example. You don't run an admin wild and everybody to make everybody an admin, etc., etc. Those are some of the steps that you could just follow to make sure that it will provide strength and also best practices for your IT technicians. You have to have a shadow IT department also. Just because an IT department is there and applying measures and mandatory access control, that doesn't mean it is the end of it. It has to be a proper audit to whatever measures they have applied. So it will come back and you would say, okay, according to this audit, everything is fine. According to this audit, for example, X and Y are not fine because they are not correctly following the baseline here for a better protection. And this is where a response becomes very vital because of the measures that if the organization is aware of how those measures are set, it will give you a better understanding when something happened, how you go and audit to see whether the measures were correctly applied or not. Let me give you an example before I hand it over to my colleagues. I used to do a pen testing long time ago for a TV channel. I think it was 15 years ago, and I just opened a firewall port. I wanted to know if it's going to trigger somebody somewhere within the IT department. Believe it or not, to this day, that port is open. I forgot to close it. I've sent them 500 emails. They blocked my email. So I no longer have access to tell them, guys, close this port. So it just indicates that baseline is going to be very vital for your organization to follow, and it has to be with transparency.
It's very worrying for the TV
That's
station.
horrifying.
So here's a great question from Marco. Are there any organizations where NGOs can go to outsource their cybersecurity risk mitigation? I'm thinking in outsourcing since most of NGOs don't have the resources to invest in and keep updated with cybersecurity in addition to their social mission. A very real issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll go first, but then Bashar. There's So one of the things that we have experienced in NetHope is there is a very big difference between an INGO that has enterprise level IT and enterprise level digital protection needs and enterprise level considerations. And then NGOs that might be a national NGO or a community-based civil society organization. Those are very different digital landscapes. And so they're very different ideas about how much of your IT landscape, and cybersecurity would be one of these, can you outsource. We know that some of our INGOs in the NetHope ecosystem do outsource some parts of their cybersecurity. Some use, for example, a SOC. Some of them have got first line support, all those types of things. That is very possible. Where it gets tricky is that they still have to maintain a level of people internally that understand the operating environment. because often when they outsource, they're outsourcing to a company or a service that has grown up in the private sector, so understands what that looks like, but may not be as well suited to, for example, how are you going to deal with cybersecurity issues in South Sudan when the government X, when the crisis looks like Y. And so that part we find that even the very big INGOs that manage to outsource still have to have a lot of in-house capacity and ability to risk assess for those types of situations that are very unique to humanitarian conservation development actors that are not quite the same that would be in the private sector. But Nina, I'm sure you've got some thoughts here as well.
Indeed. To be honest, it is a very, very tricky question, Marco, because you basically are thinking about handing over the keys to your ecosystem to a third party. And as Diana mentioned, even if you do so, even if there are organizations who will come and say, as an insurance backup provider, we will take care of your cybersecurity risk and we will manage it. If you do not have a team, I could just come up and tell you I have done everything for you and charge you on a regular basis without an internal audit that could go back. You know, it's the same case with pen testing. Why do we often recommend having an external pen tester, an internal pen tester, to make sure that whatever was achieved, whatever was reported at the end, correlate together and make sure that the story is the correct one? It doesn't mean that I wouldn't trust a third party. It just, you have to also understand that you want to be in charge and in control of your own cybersecurity in some form, in some way. Now, involving two provider, involving two pen tester, involving two solution, and so on and so forth, that will give. But also remember, especially when it comes to SIM environment, when you would ask my cybersecurity to be handed over to a third party, they have to read and they have to access to every log that your organization is creating. Basically, they will see everything that comes in and out. So it is really tricky, but it has to be a balance. And this is where an investment, this is where the second question from Antonio comes and says, well, what should we do? What is the message here for continuous capacity building? And this is where, even if you invest today in one individual today, that you will say, take care of my cybersecurity, even though there is a third party that we go for, in a couple of months, couple of years, at least you have somebody within that department. Also, to add another to this question from Antonia, remember there are different levels of cybersecurity capacity building that we have to think about. Not everybody is in advance, not everybody need to be in advance. Different levels according to the roles and responsibilities of each of us. For example, Daniela doesn't need to understand how, for example, I break code. Why should I go and force her through that? And Diana, you are more than welcome to go through some of those painful trainings because it is requirement for her, for example. I hope the message is clear here. To be able to sustain the organization, we need to think about different levels. That will come back to Marco's question. How do we go and say, I'm going to hand over all my cybersecurity to a third party? Fair enough, do so, but also remember that a team and an individual within the house should also understand what has been done and what has been achieved. And I hope that all makes sense.
I think I'd elaborate a little bit on the part you brought up then, because exactly, Antonio, your question is exactly the right one. What we notice when we're talking about this type of thing is when we're talking about cybersecurity here, we are almost inevitably talking to people in IT departments, which is great because you already understand technology, and this is obviously very straightforward, and that's all, so much so understanding. The problem space that we're emerging into is that digital is everywhere in our nonprofits. And so the training that you're giving is yes, you need to give general staff basic cyber hygiene, like 90%, even Microsoft said this, 90% of attacks would be mitigated, would be stopped if we all just had MFA, right? Like that is a huge win, which most nonprofits really, really struggle with, as Nino was showing. Like it's hard. But we would win a lot just there. That's your general staff stuff. Don't answer a phishing email, all that kind of thing. But every person that is involved in program design in your countries, for example, in your fields of impact, those folks are day to day making trade-offs on a risk assessment about, I'm going to create a digital environment that these clients, these beneficiaries, these program participants will be working in. And they have to be able to make that trade-off. And potentially, they didn't grow up in an IT or cybersecurity place. They maybe came up through WASH, or they came up through any other logistics or those types of places, and now they're in program design. And so the training for them is again different to, again, what Nino and I would think of as pure cybersecurity training, which would be, how are you going to harden your Office 365? How are you thinking about network ports? What are you doing on your networks, etc.? Those are very different things. And so one of the first pieces of advice that our community often gives is, when you're thinking about your data ecosystem and those types of things, when you're thinking about that governance, is to think of some of those personas and go through what would their different training needs potentially be? What would their big pain points be? And then work through that as well, because it's very, very different. Again, not quite like the private sector, right? So we have to have that conversation a little bit different here. Yeah.
Thank you both. I think we have answered the questions we had in the chat, so I'm gonna hand it back to Seth. Seth?
Diana, are you there?
Here
Can
he
you come
is.
off mute?
I think weirdly Seth is talking to me. So I think we are going to wrap it up there.
Lost you there for a second there, Diana. Sorry about that.
Oh, there we go.
Continue, please.
Seth couldn't hear us. There we go. So we're just going to wrap it up then. And what we're going to say is thank you for everybody for joining us. We are NetHope. We appreciate everybody's support in this piece. And then I would be remiss if I didn't say that NetHope believes in collective action here. And as some of my colleagues have mentioned, cybersecurity, like most nonprofit actions, is a collective sport. We all have to join together. We are one supply chain of aid. We're often one supply chain of data. We share a lot of things. And so we really invite, especially NetHope members, to join in our community, but also for folks that are joining from other NGOs, etc., that we would invite you to come to, for example, our summit and to our open webinars and those types of things, and participate in our research, and consider being a NetHope member. And Nino will definitely share his email because he is the man of the hour who is going to solve all your cybersecurity problems if you are a NetHope member. So thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you, Seth, for hosting us. To Daniela and to Nino, thank you for bringing us this information and to our participants. We're very grateful. Have a very lovely day.
Thank you, everyone.